Hello, everyone, and welcome to Building SaaS on AWS, the AWS SaaS Factory show for builders of SaaS here on Twitch. My name is Anthony McClure, and I am a solutions architect with the AWS SaaS Factory and your host for today's show. If you are currently a builder of software as a service solutions or are just looking to begin the process of learning how to design, build, deploy, and operate multi-tenant solutions, then this is the show for you. As in every show, we strive to bring you subject matter experts in the many different aspects of software as a service and dive deep into those categories so that we can all learn how to build SaaS together here on the AWS cloud. In today's show is certainly no different, as we are going to be discussing some of the different multi-tenant architectures that are available to us as we are building SaaS. And more importantly, we will be diving deep with some of our guests here on what those decisions and those architectural options that you have available to you can have implication wise on how you actually perform and operate your SaaS solutions, such as doing DevOps, platform engineering, things of those natures. But before we jump in and bring in our guest and get started today, I do want to give a great big welcome to everybody that is joining us live on Twitch. Hello, everyone. And if you are there, please feel free to tell us hello in the comment section. Let us know where you're from. And while you're there, be sure to give a big shout out to Mr. Bill Tarr, who is also a solutions architect with the SaaS Factory and acting as our moderator in the chat today. Bill can also help you with some questions that you may have. And if you have questions that are pertinent to the information that we're talking about, we will try to answer that, or my guests and I will try to answer that as well live as we can get to it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in today. I am excited to say that I do have a repeat guest with me as our first guest that I would like to bring on, a fellow solutions architect with the AWS SaaS Factory. Hello, Mr. Ranjith Rahman, and welcome back to the show. You've been on many times in the past.
Yeah, I know. Morning, Anthony. Hello, everyone. My name is Ranjit Raman, a solutions architect with AWS SaaS Factory team. Happy to be back.
Well, great. Awesome. Very cool. Now, of course, we do get new people all the time that are joining our show. They may not be familiar with who the SaaS Factory is, what it is that we do. Ranjit, can you tell us a little bit about the SaaS Factory and what you do for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the AWS SaaS Factory team, so we are a group of solutions architects and SaaS business architects. So what we do is like we work with AWS customers or customers building SaaS on top of AWS and also AWS partners because we are part of the AWS partner network. So we work with our partners, AWS partners quite a bit. So and what we do is like we basically go out and help these customers and partners with designing and optimizing SaaS on top of AWS, and we provide best practices and recommendations on how to build a good SaaS solution on top of AWS and by leveraging AWS services. So that's basically what we do as a SaaS Factory team. Yeah.
Awesome. Excellent. And today, of course, we have some special guests with us. We have AWS partner DuploCloud, who will be joining us in just a moment. But I've heard also, Ranjit, right? You've worked quite a bit with DuploCloud here lately. How did you meet up with them?
Yeah, so I mean, the history sort of started late last year. So it was we started working with Ian and Andy, who you'll see shortly on the screen here. It was, the whole idea was, we within SaaS Factory, we typically work, we build SaaS examples and reference architectures and solutions by directly leveraging AWS services. We build them directly on top of AWS services, right? And we did see a segment or a category of customers that prefer a layer of abstraction, or they prefer like an easier ramp into AWS or just cloud services in general. And we wanted to sort of look into that a little bit more closely, right? And so it was actually John Lawrence, SaaS Factory's SA manager, and I. We looked at DuploCloud, we reached out to the team, the internal AWS team, and then to Ian and Andy, and basically pitched the idea that, hey, there's an opportunity here to provide a SaaS specific view or an angle uh, by leveraging DuploCloud, and let's build something. And the DuploCloud folks, they were super receptive to the idea, and that's how the whole journey started. And we went ahead and built some cool examples, and here we are to talk about all that in the show. So
Excellent. That sounds like quite a story. And you know what? Without further ado, why don't we go ahead and bring Ian and
yeah.
Andy on with us as well? I'd like to welcome to the show Mr. Ian Hutchinson and Andy Boutte. Welcome, both of you. Ian, why don't we go ahead and start out with you today? Would you please introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about DuploCloud?
Yeah, happy to. Good morning, everyone, and good to see you. Myself, I lead the go-to-market side of DuploCloud. I've been in SaaS. I joined a YC company in summer 2011, right after Demo Day. So I've definitely been in the ecosystem in the world for a while. I joined DuploCloud when we were 3 developers working away, and I always think building a company from a SaaS business is a difficult thing with milestones, whether it be 1 million ARR, 10 million ARR, so on and so forth. But having a lot of fun doing it and working with a lot of SaaS companies, which we'll talk about as we get into this. But fundamentally, I think Ranjit teed it up well with the DuploCloud is helping to simplify the DevOps layer. And we can talk about what that actually means in a little bit. Back over to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Ian. And Andy, how about yourself? Go ahead and introduce yourself as well. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm a solutions architect here at DuploCloud, primarily focusing on the pre-sale side, and I've been here for a bit over a year. I got started in the kind of cloud DevOps space about 12 years ago as a DevOps engineer, and became a cloud architect, and have worked for both ISVs and SIs, and worked in industries from e-commerce to government. So yeah, happy to be here to talk more about this.
Excellent. Welcome again. So speaking of DuploCloud specifically, I know Ranjit kind of teed up things a little bit there as far as our interactions with you and some of the work that we've been working on together. But Ian, perhaps you could go into a little bit of detail about who DuploCloud is, what are the products and services that you offer?
Yeah, sure. Happy to help with that. I think philosophically, the area that we got passionate about was with the advent of Kubernetes, microservices, CI/CD pipelines, observability, like a lot of awesome innovation in the space in general. More and more time was getting spent at configuring, stitching together all of these areas and things. And in the spirit of making things easier for developers, we wanted to make the nuances of infrastructure, security, and compliance easier. Being software-oriented people, we started building software as we were working with organizations to do this. It's single-tenant software. I'll actually give you guys a sneak peek now. We're going to do a proper demo later on, but let me share my screen, and it always helps to have a visual.
Absolutely.
So DevOps on autopilot is what you're going to see when you go to DuploCloud.com. There is a portal, but again, this is all runs inside of our customers' individual AWS accounts. It's accessed through SSO, and both administrators and developers can use it to do all things DevOps. So think provisioning infrastructure, think what you would do through the console, CloudFormation, Terraform, so on and so forth, as well as extensible across the DevOps sphere, which I keep alluding to in a very abstract sense. But we will talk more about what that means as we go.
Excellent. Oh, thank you. So, all of this sounds really quite intriguing and super helpful to AWS customers, especially that are just starting to get started. Maybe you don't have that kind of experience of building solutions on AWS. But when we're talking about SaaS specifically and multi-tenant capabilities here, how do you see yourselves working with SaaS companies as well, or how DuploCloud plays into that?
Yeah, I think it's funny talking to technology leaders. There's a point in time when things get real, when downtime is no longer okay, when you've got customers in production and they need to know that their data is stored in a proper manner based on whatever that means for them, the type of data, the industry you're working in, so on and so forth. It could mean you're hiring more and more developers and you're working on the same application and you need to make the individual microservices more and more independent. I think fundamentally, we see these different requirements convert into the architecture that our customers move forward with. And so when things start getting real at organizations is when we see one of these waves of DevOps work come. And usually that's when development teams, either hire internally if they've got the resources to, or look at options and look at what I call cheating and hacking. And as a startup, sometimes you have to cheat a little bit just to move fast, get things done, and find a way to make it work.
Yeah, make it work, then make it elegant, right? Yeah, absolutely. So along with that, then, if we're talking about SaaS, we talk about SaaS having different deployment models, different ways that we can actually produce a multi-tenant solution. And I assume then, DuploCloud has options or different features that are available depending on the different kinds of multi-tenancy that you're actually producing.
Yeah, absolutely, we do. I think the thing I'd like to sort of start with is, it's sort of the AWS mantra of keep things simple first if you can, and then build for complexity as you know that you need to. And with some organizations, I talk to them about, yes, you've got this enterprise customer that's asking for security and compliance requirements, but are you going to, is this going to come up again and again and again and again and again?
Right.
And if you can sort of forward out a year, what type of product do you have? Is it going to be used by consumers? Is it going to be used by enterprises? What sorts of things are they going to do? Andy, I know you were looking at some of the data around our customers and their different tenancy. Can I pass it over to you to talk a little bit about the approaches to tenancy?
Yeah, I can share my screen and show off a couple of different models that we support. But to briefly talk about the numbers, let me pull up the diagrams and we can walk through them.
Get that up here. There we go.
So yeah, we have a couple of different models of tenancy that DuploCloud, our platform, can support. The first one is the obvious one where the tenancy doesn't really come from like the infrastructure. It's actually the tenancy is actually baked into the application itself. It understands the logic of how to isolate customer data, whether it's in S3 or in a relational database. And then another model is what we call a DuploCloud tenant, and we'll get more into the specifics of what that actually means. But DuploCloud has this concept of a tenant, and it allows us to share infrastructure, but be able to isolate customers from each other. And the boundary between those tenants are things like a security group and an IAM role. And again, we'll get into more details of what this looks like later on in the show. Next concept is we can do a DuploCloud infrastructure per customer. So this is a more like severe isolation between customers, and that the boundary would be like the network layer. And then we can go to another even more extreme level of doing multiple cloud accounts, multiple AWS accounts, one AWS account per customer if we need that level of isolation. And then we support a bunch of hybrid models depending on what the requirements are for our customers. And then Ian, back to the numbers, about 20% of our customers have some sort of a hybrid model. So the vast majority of the customers have tenancy supported natively by the application, but about 20% of our customers require infrastructure to help create that tenancy and isolation between the customers.
Interesting. So, taking a look at all of this, of course, these are very similar models to what we talk about with the AWS SaaS Factory, and how we produce or talk about how to produce SaaS, the different ways that this can be done. So all this looks very, very familiar to us here. But from the capabilities that DuploCloud brings to the table, then it seems like you can, maybe even play the role of certain other individuals within an organization based on the tooling that you have. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, we take on a lot of different roles for our customers. I mean, sometimes it's just DevOps engineer, and DevOps engineer could be our software itself, enabling our customers, software developers, to actually own their own ops. So our software is enabling them to own infrastructure, but not have to understand like the complexities of DevOps, understand the complexities of compliance, understand AWS at a very deep technical level. That's the obvious role that we play for all of our customers. But then, depending on the stage that the company's in, we also sometimes play the role of cloud architects. They have an idea of a product that they're wanting to put out, but they need some insight into how to best architect that on AWS, and we will definitely put on that hat for our customers. Then the other obvious one is compliance. Compliance frameworks like SOC 2 have become extremely important in recent years. The vast majority of our customers have some sort of compliance requirements, whether that's like SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, GDPR, NIST, high trust. So we play the role of kind of the security team. We are the tool that's creating their infrastructure. So we are the thing that is creating a lot of those compliance controls. So we're heavily involved in our customers' audit process. We are the team that will help collect evidence. We might have to sit in on a call with the auditor. So we play that security team also for a lot of our customers.
Interesting. Excellent. Yes. And that, we at the SaaS Factory have started to say that, well-architected SaaS equals compliant SaaS, right? It's always something that we should be thinking about from the beginning. I know in many cases, this is something that comes along later, and you kind of realize that you need to go down these compliance roads. Obviously, the earlier you can start this process, really the better off you are as an organization. And it's great to see that your tools and capabilities help with that. I think that's pretty important. And it's a very complex topic, right? It's not an easy thing to answer. There's no one size that kind of fits everyone when we're talking about compliance either. So maybe we'll go back to Ranjit here just for a second. Ranjit, these different capabilities that Andy and Ian are talking about here, hearing from our customers that are in these situations where they want to build out these solutions but don't necessarily have these roles, right, and these capabilities of building this out. Is this what you started to see in our customers as well, and kind of led you towards finding DuploCloud?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, because you have customers that have different requirements, different skill set. Like, they might be new to the cloud and to certain services, right? So, and there are customers that are at a pretty advanced stage, like they may not need, yeah. So I think for me, one of the first things was to come up with the tenancy models, the different models that Andy was sharing, right? Because anytime we have a discussion with customers, like customers building SaaS, tenant isolation is one of the key things that we always talk about, right? And so when we started the engagement, like when I started chatting with Andy, even though the DuploCloud platform had all those capabilities built in, there was not a view of the different models it can support. And for us, one of the first tasks was like, maybe it was more for me, like to visualize like how we can take some of the SaaS concepts and map that to the DuploCloud platform, so that it becomes easier for me to take that to SaaS customers, right? And one of the first output or the artifact that came out of the engagement was the 5 models that Andy was sharing, right? And because SaaS customers, they have requirements. It could be compliance or regulatory, like they want their own dedicated instances, dedicated EKS cluster, and some tenants, they're okay to share infrastructure. So we wanted to show all that, like what are the different ways we could do that with DuploCloud. And yeah, so that was really the first output of our of our engagement.
So if we take that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ian.
Go.
Yeah.
No, I was going to jump in here and say that, like, even in the very, very early days of DuploCloud, like, one of the things in our mind was that AWS by default doesn't have like an application centric way of looking at things. So if there's a spike in EC2 spend or something is happening or changing, it's not natural to say, okay, it's very clear as to which environment, which application, which tenant, so on and so forth. Or if you're troubleshooting, the same thing goes away. So one of the core constructs to a lot of the things that we built in the early days was, how do you bring an app centric or a tenant centric translation to the area, whatever that means for the individual deployment model. But
For that, for that customer.
Translate that. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. So to that point, then, I assume that you have then logical constructs or building blocks that DuploCloud has come up with that really helps to enable this tenancy and make these things come together, right? And is there anything you can touch on there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one is that we kind of described in the some of those diagrams was the tenant. In AWS, that the DuploCloud tenant represents things like the security group, IAM role, and AWS KMS key, SSH key, and a Kubernetes namespace. So that's like one building block. And then to go down a layer, the next building block that DuploCloud has is what we call DuploCloud infrastructure, which represents a VPC and all the related VPC services, subnets, ACL, route table, things like that. And then a Kubernetes cluster, an EKS cluster on top of that VPC. So we've tried to like abstract away the complexity of creating those things, and we'll get into it a little bit deeper in a minute. We have just a simple web interface for creating both of those building blocks, and we also have an infrastructure as code option for creating those building blocks.
Very interesting. And so we've talked about a lot of different capabilities at this point that DuploCloud kind of brings to the forefront, helps our customers out with, which is great. Everything from managing these different multi-tenant environments to compliance, right? And helping your customers to make their compliance goals. So perhaps this would be a great time then to transition and maybe see a little bit about the DuploCloud platform, which you've got there. Andy, if you don't mind doing a demo for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me pull up my screen again. I'm going to start off with just starting off with this simple diagram just to explain kind of the different ways that users can interact with the DuploCloud platform. Ian pulled up a few minutes ago the web interface, so that's the most obvious interface that customers can use. So we have a set of DuploCloud users. The vast majority of our users are actually software developers, but we do have some DevOps engineers that use the platform. But the most common way that customers interact with our DuploCloud platform is through our web interface. And then I alluded to a minute ago about our infrastructure as code option. So DuploCloud has a Terraform provider, and we'll be showing that off in just a minute. And then I can speak to CI/CD also a bit. But regardless of the interface that the user is using, these three different options all talk back to the DuploCloud platform. And like Ian mentioned earlier, the DuploCloud platform it's self-hosted, so it lives inside of our customer's account. DuploCloud itself does not have like a control plane or anything on our side, so no data is leaving our customers' environments. And then the DuploCloud platform and its rules-based engine takes in that input of, what infrastructure do we need? What tenants do we need? What are the compliance requirements? All of those things. And the DuploCloud platform is actually talking directly to the AWS APIs to, create and manage that infrastructure. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage of what that kind of looks like. And we can now switch over to my IDE here. And I'm just going to kick off a deployment. Some of these pieces will take a minute or two to actually create. But I'm just here in the terminal. I'm going to kick off a Terraform deployment, and we can kind of walk through, what some of these things look like. So while that's going, I'll talk through this. We're starting off by just running an apply command. DuploCloud just has a wrapper script around a normal Terraform apply. That wrapper script's just doing some basic things like setting up a remote state S3 bucket, setting up the Dynamo DB table for locking, things like that. And then this argument here is, as you can kind of tell, it's the name of our customer. It's our tenant name. So I'm creating a new tenant inside of Duplo. It's called customer C. And the Terraform project that we're running to create that is called admin tenant. You can see that here on the left-hand side, the file navigation. Under the Terraform directory, we have an admin tenant directory. So that's the Terraform project that we're running. And we'll dive into that a bit more in a second. And we want to place this customer C tenant inside, inside of the infrastructure called prod common. So if we think back to some of those diagrams, this customer C for maybe price-wise or maybe compliance-wise, this customer has opted to get dropped into a multi-tenant infrastructure, but it will be a single tenant application because we still have the tenant model surrounding this application. I'm going to just confirm that we want to create that. You can see the resource that we're going to create. This is using our DuploCloud Terraform provider. So it's creating a DuploCloud tenant. And that's going to go off and start creating. So while that's creating, I will jump up into the DuploCloud interface and kind of give a little overview of some things while we wait for some of that infrastructure to get created. So I'm in that same DuploCloud portal that Ian was sharing earlier. I'm under the administrator section, under the infrastructure section. And you can see here that we have two different infrastructures. We have prod common, which is the one I just mentioned a moment ago.
Right?
This is going to be a multi-tenant infrastructure. So we're going to have, n number of customers that would live inside of this infrastructure. And this infrastructure at a high level is the VPC and the Kubernetes cluster. So that VPC and that Kubernetes cluster will be shared across n number of customers. And we'll get into much more detail about that with an architecture diagram in just a minute. But then we have another infrastructure, which is prod customer 01. So this customer, maybe for compliance reasons, they have a requirement that they need to live in a completely isolated network from all other tenants. So we can create a DuploCloud infrastructure and then create a single tenant on top of this infrastructure. And now customer 01 is completely isolated.
So these two infrastructures that you've defined here, then the prod common one would be like our shared tenant model that we talk about, and then this prod customer 01 that you created would be a silo model, basically for a single customer.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep, that's exactly right. And I'll quickly just show, just from the web interface perspective, creating a DuploCloud infrastructure, it's very easy. You just give it a name, fill in a CIDR block for the VPC, select your AWS region, and then optionally turn on or off EKS and hit create. And then DuploCloud is going to manage, setting up that VPC and all the related VPC services, creating the EKS cluster and all the other related services to support that EKS cluster.
Very nice. Yeah.
And really quickly, if you can go back to the previous screen.
Yep.
Creating an infrastructure, right? So you see enable EKS, it's just a button, right? So you just toggle it. But you can imagine, like, if you had to create an EKS cluster using like CloudFormation or CDK or through other means, it can be pretty involved. It can be an involved process.
Yeah, there's going to be load balancers. Yeah, ingress controllers. Yeah, there's so many things that go.
There's so many things that goes on. Like, but with DuploCloud and what they provide, like, it's just like a toggle, just say enable EKS, and it's going to provision an entire EKS cluster for you, right, Andy?
Yeah, exactly. We're trying to simplify a lot of those pain points that customers might be feeling by setting up everything from scratch, either Terraform, CloudFormation, or using just like the AWS console natively.
And are you using, to create those actual resources then, how are you determining basically what kind of resources are stood up for that infrastructure that you're doing? For instance, size of compute, things of that nature. Is that something that's configurable, or is it? Do you have an opinionated view of that as far as creating these infrastructures?
Yeah, great question. And we'll get more into it in the diagrams in a minute. But to answer the question, we're so far with the infrastructure, we've just created like the VPC and the EKS cluster. We actually haven't created any compute because that's going to come in just a second when we talk about the tenant level resources.
Excellent.
And so yes, it all will be configurable. So really quick, I just want to show the tenants. So we have a list of tenants here. This is the one that we just created via Terraform. We do have 2 other tenants, customer A and customer B. You can see over here that customer A has opted to go into the pooled model, and then we have customer B here, and they are in an isolated model. The prod customer 1 was that infrastructure we just talked about a moment ago. And just really quick to show, again, very easy. We create a name for a tenant, and then we select which infrastructure we want that tenant to live on top of. So if we were going to onboard a new customer and we weren't going to use the infrastructure as code, you could create a new tenant, select the pooled model, prod common, and hit create, and DuploCloud will create a new tenant.
So in looking at all of this, this looks very familiar to what we would talk about as being a control plane, right? And essentially a control plane exists for you out of the box in this case, which is really exciting.
Yes, absolutely. So we can see here the Terraform finished. It created that tenant. I'm going to kick off the next kind of layer of services. We call this layer just the AWS services. So this would be all the services that are required to support running whatever the application is. It could be an S3 bucket, RDS, SQS, SNS, all those AWS services that applications might depend on. So I'm going to go kick that off. And so we just showed from the web interface what it looks like to create an infrastructure and a tenant. But now I want to actually show like the Terraform resource to show that it's in Terraform or the web interface. It's a very simplified process to create those. So up here we have this Terraform resource. This is, I'm going to go ahead and confirm this, let that run in the background. This Terraform resource, again, it's coming from our DuploCloud Terraform provider. This is the DuploCloud infrastructure. And you can see it's about 10 lines or so of Terraform, and we can create all those lower level resources. Again, the infrastructure represents the VPC and the Kubernetes cluster. So like Ranjit was just saying a minute ago, turning on Kubernetes is just a Boolean here. So very, very simple, lightweight to manage that.
Looks very similar to the UI that you just showed,
yes.
But just in Terraform.
Exactly. Yep. And here's how to create a DuploCloud tenant. Again, we just have to give it a name, select what infrastructure we want that tenant to live in, and then DuploCloud will do like the heavy lifting of creating the tenant resources, which would be things like the security group and IAM role to isolate customer from customer. And I just want to show a quick example of what it looks like to create like an AWS service. So like we're creating an S3 bucket. In creating any sort of AWS resources, whether it's S3 or RDS or SNS, we're basically slotting in that resource and placing it inside of a tenant. So here we're creating an S3 bucket. The bucket name is going to be backups, and that S3 bucket from a DuploCloud perspective is going to live inside of the selected tenant.
That tenant ID. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that's that piece has finished. I'm going to kick off actually deploying the app. And then while the app one is running, we can kind of dive into some of the infrastructure like diagrams so we can actually look at these different building blocks. So I'll wait for a second to let me confirm this. So here we're going to deploy some containers to Kubernetes. We're going to create a load balancer in front of those containers. We're going to set up SSL, all those types of things, and then DuploCloud will finally create it will automatically create a DNS record to map to that load balancer.
So much of this is what we like to call undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? These are the kinds of tasks that are necessary in order to have a software as a service solution, a well-architected one, building out all of this infrastructure, building out this control plane to manage it all. And DuploCloud has produced this, as something that you couldn't go out, purchase from them, work with them on to potentially, save you a lot of coding, it looks like here too. So it's pretty impressive.
Absolutely. And the kind of interesting and cool thing is that it's the capabilities that we're creating are really just building blocks. So we don't really have like a prescriptive view on how you have to put those blocks together. So you can create, also all different types of isolation for your customers using these building blocks.
So we do have a quick question from the audience, Andy, that I wanted to bring up here. And it's related to databases. So ZB_C says, how did databases, RDS in this case, what he's asking for, get managed in regards to deprovisioning a customer, but has some kind of data retention for compliance purposes? Is this something that you've thought about and is included here?
Yeah, so that definitely comes up every once in a while. If I jump into the DuploCloud console here, let's say customer A is going to go offline, for whatever reason, but for compliance reasons, their database has to be retained. If we look under cloud services, under database, DuploCloud itself supports RDS natively. One of our engineers or one of the engineers from our customer could hop into DuploCloud. I don't have an RDS provision right now, but from the DuploCloud interface, they'd be able to create that snapshot to retain it for a specific set of time, and then tag it so that we can retain it for that required period of time.
And that can all be done right here inside of your interface without even going into the AWS console.
Yes.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you for the question, ZB_C.
Yeah, and I believe there is an option if customers do want to go to their the AWS console. Like there is a way to get to that from here.
Yeah, that is a great point. I do have an example of that here. So we're inside of customer A tenant under storage. We do have an S3 bucket. If I open up that S3 bucket, a common pattern for S3 buckets is the user might not want to use like the AWS CLI, for example, to list objects or upload objects, download objects. They just want to use the AWS S3 console to manage some simple interactions. A nice feature about DuploCloud is DuploCloud provides just-in-time access to resources like this S3 bucket, but the permissions that we're going to grant to that user are scoped specifically down to this tenant. So I have this console button here. DuploCloud making an API call to AWS to generate temporary credentials opens up a new tab for me, and I'm immediately in the AWS console. But my user, like my laptop, does not have like an IAM user in this AWS account. So we did just-in-time access to AWS, and I'm inside of that bucket here. And just to show as an example, if we go up one level and I pick a different bucket, I don't have that. This bucket is not in my tenant, so I do not have access to this bucket. So there's lots of options like that. Like Ranjit was saying, if maybe the DuploCloud the DuploCloud platform does not have a specific feature, or you wanted to snapshot that RDS database in a slightly different way for whatever reason, or apply different tagging or something, you can jump into the AWS console, and those permissions will be scoped down just to the resources that are in that tenant.
That's really great from a compliance perspective. And I'm also curious then on that front, using the tool, then going in, getting access to resources directly in the AWS console from here, using those scope down credentials. Is that also logged for audit purposes as well? So this can act as an audit path to see who in your organization has accessed production information?
So absolutely. So the DuploCloud has an audit feature built into it. So any actions that are taken inside of Duplo, we can see, who did what, when, and then once they're actually in AWS, obviously there's things like CloudTrail to map out, what actions they took directly in AWS outside of Duplo.
Very nice.
So we have that full audit trail.
So all this is absolutely fantastic, Andy, and I know that you also have some additional diagrams that you wanted to go over as far as the architecture is concerned.
Yeah, let's jump into that. Let me full screen this. I just want to kind of walk through the building blocks of what we deployed via Terraform, but from like a diagram perspective. So we have just an empty AWS account, a couple of availability zones, standard AWS stuff. Now I'm kind of zoomed in on just the top portion of that diagram, and what we've just laid on top here is what is the DuploCloud infrastructure. So the DuploCloud infrastructure is a VPC with public and private subnets spanning multiple availability zones. That DuploCloud infrastructure is going to include the EKS cluster with the control plane in a private subnet. We've got, NAT gateways, IGW, we got the route tables, subnets, et cetera. That the standard sort of VPC things that you would have to create, with CloudFormation or the AWS console. But all of this gets created and managed by that simple, web interface that we showed, or the DuploCloud Terraform resource. So next, we can layer on top of that a DuploCloud tenant. So the tenant represents a Kubernetes namespace, and we have a security group. We have an SSH key, an IAM role, and an AWS KMS key for additional layers of isolation. Then we can deploy the AWS services that are required to support the application itself. And Anthony, this goes back to your previous question about the being able to choose the size and capacity. Yeah. So the actual compute size is controlled at a tenant level. So inside of a specific tenant, we can create an EC2 instance. DuploCloud automatically will register that with EKS as a worker node. We can also create an RDS instance, and we can create an S3 bucket. This EC2 instance's access at a network level to this RDS is automatically handled by DuploCloud. So the user doesn't have to think about or manage security groups. The security group and what ports are open is managed by Duplo. And then similarly, the EC2 instance in any containers running on top of that EC2 instance will automatically have IAM access to the S3 bucket, because the tenant itself is the thing that creates the IAM role and the policies associated with that IAM role. So there's no security groups to manage, there's no IAM roles, there's no instance profiles, IAM policies to manage. Duplo manages all that.
That's amazing.
And then
That's great.
The last layer is actually deploying the application. So DuploCloud is actually talking to Kubernetes directly to deploy all the containers for whatever the workload is. DuploCloud will automatically create an application load balancer, and then DuploCloud will automatically create a DNS record that maps to that application load balancer.
So it handles the entire ingress, essentially.
Yes.
Creates the entire ingress for that that tenant.
Yes. So in the example that I ran through in Terraform, I already had the DuploCloud infrastructure pre-created, but on this call, I deployed all the other layers. So I created the tenant, I created the AWS services, and I deployed the application. And we did that all within a matter of a few minutes, because of that abstraction layer. It's very simple and quick. So now we can move on to kind of expand on this. I'm zoomed out again, and then we're going to zoom in on the lower section of the diagram. So you can see here we've created another VPC. This represents a second DuploCloud infrastructure, and now we'll kind of zoom in on that. And then we can kind of repeat the process. This VPC, this DuploCloud infrastructure represents a pooled model. So here we've created the DuploCloud tenant. So we have another security group, namespace, IAM role, et cetera. Then we've deployed the AWS services inside of that tenant. Then we've deployed the application. We've created the load balancer, created the DNS record, et cetera. And then we've deployed a second tenant inside of that pooled DuploCloud infrastructure. And again, deployed the AWS services and then the application. And then finally, we have a zoomed out view. So we can stamp out these different deployments and these different tenancies and isolations very easily using these building blocks that's provided by DuploCloud.
Very impressive.
And you can stand it up in like no time, right? So if
we
have,
just saw it, right?
It's pretty awesome. Like for me, the experience. Yeah, I mean, when I first tried out DuploCloud, like the experience was like awesome. I mean, I was like, this is how it should be, right? Like if you're a customer, if you're someone that has your applications containerized, and if you have that image stored somewhere in the registry, all you have to do is like come here, like Andy was showing, like create the infrastructure, create the tenant, and then just point to your images in that registry, and within a few minutes you're going to stand up an entire solution, and then start serving traffic into that solution, which was like, it was awesome to see for me, just to experience that. It was awesome. So
very nice.
Yeah.
Looks like we have another question from the audience that came in. This is from ZB_C again. Thank you for the question. How big can you go on shared pool and complete isolation? In other words, are there limits, up just up to account size limits, or are there other limitations that you?
Yeah, the limitations that we would run into. So I mean, just to reiterate the question, what we're talking about is taking a DuploCloud infrastructure that's a pooled one, prod common, and how many tenants can we fit inside that. The interesting thing about the way we have that isolation. So I'm in customer A. Let me actually just switch to customer C. Customer C is the one we just created. If I go to cloud services and I go to hosts, these are the EKS worker nodes that are registered to the shared EKS cluster. But these EC2 instances, these Kubernetes worker nodes, are dedicated to customer C. So we don't have any sort of, there's no like limitations on the DuploCloud side. It would be more limitations on, what's your quota limit inside of AWS? How many EC2 instances can you create? How many RDSs can you create? Would be the limits that we find our customers bumping up into.
Yep, excellent. Of course, many times those limits can be adjusted as as needed as well. So, yeah, I certainly wouldn't be fearful on that one. ZB_C. Great question, though. Thank you for that. So we implemented, or we brought in customer C earlier. So if we wanted to bring in a new tenant, it would just be following that same process, Andy, and just changing out the tenant name essentially.
Yep. So this was the command that we ran earlier to create the tenant. If I wanted to create, a new customer today, we were going to onboard a new customer. It would be as simple as just changing that command to customer D, then rerunning the previous sets of Terraform modules. For demonstration purposes, I was showing this from a terminal, but what we typically do for our customers is wrap up all of this into a pipeline so that they have just basically a one-click to onboard a customer as needed.
Yeah, I just want to quickly point out that that the command that Andy has there, it's going to land that new tenant customer D into a shared infrastructure, right? So this is when you
common, right?
Yeah, so it's the same EKS cluster. It's going to create a separate, like a dedicated namespace for the new tenant. But if you have a tenant that says, hey, you know what, I need my own infrastructure, compliance and other reasons, right? You can do that too, right? So you just have to create a infrastructure first and then apply the same command into that infrastructure. So that's how easy it is to do the
so we would just change that infrastructure underscore name value to prod customer 01, right?
Exactly.
I think was what it was.
Yep. Absolutely.
Very nice. Very cool.
And the other thing is, like, we are focusing a lot on Kubernetes and EKS, and the solution that Andy and I built, it's focused on EKS, but DuploCloud also supports like other, like if you want like ECS, right? So you do support ECS as well, right, Andy?
Yep. So if we go back to DuploCloud infrastructure, if I were to show creating another one, here we have ECS. So again, just a toggle, turn it on, turn it off.
That's it. Yep.
Excellent. So I wanted to give an opportunity here to bring Ian back in as well. Ian, we've been talking a lot about how DuploCloud can help SaaS specific customers, and I know that you are currently working on a SaaS specific campaign for DuploCloud. Is that correct?
Yeah, very much so. So I mean, there's a before I get to that question, one of the things I wanted to say is we went deeper on DuploCloud than I thought we would. So I appreciate it. There's some questions that we typically get that haven't come up through the chat. DuploCloud has a frequently asked questions at docs.duploCloud.com. We can post it in the chat, but it's things such as like, if you need to lead DuploCloud down the road, what does that look like? If you need to make a custom configuration, if you need to get under the hood, because something is not undifferentiated heavy lifting. It is something that is important to you guys. How much control and flexibility do you have underneath that? So there's a bunch of questions that come in there that we can look at. But I think the more interesting one for people who are curious based on what they've seen so far is you can also get your hands on DuploCloud, and that's something when Ranjith and Andy were talking about the project they built. I don't know, Andy, I've got some of the landing pages pulled up and some of the documentation around that. I can share my screen and if you want to speak to it.
Absolutely.
Cool.
All right. Switch over here. Ian's screen's available. There we go.
Cool. Excellent. So this is our customer documentation, docs.duploCloud.com. Things such as, can I make changes directly in my cloud account, so on and so forth. This is the campaign we put together: build and deploy SaaS on AWS. I believe Bill's also gonna throw a link in the chat referencing this. You can schedule time with Andy or one of our solutions architects to go through this. But effectively, what we've done here, Andy, do you want to share a little bit more on the actual reference architecture?
Yeah, absolutely. So the project that I was actually deploying that we are kind of showing off inside of DuploCloud, it's that project is this project that's in GitHub. This was the project that Ranjit and I worked on. This was recently made public. It's available in the AWS samples GitHub repository. We can share that link out. But this project includes a sample, SaaS application, and then it also includes all that infrastructure as code, that Terraform that I've been showing off.
Nice.
So that you can actually, get in touch with Duplo, get access to a DuploCloud environment, and then kind of play around with its reference architecture and see how it might apply to your SaaS application.
Yeah, in the spirit of this, I mean, the development community in general has been awesome to us. AWS has been absolutely incredible in terms of helping us. We're as an organization, we're 5 years old. In contrast to Amazon, we are very much a small company and early in our journey. But a big kudos to all the people who've supported us along the way so far. We want to give back if we can in any way, shape, or form, regardless of where you're at in your SaaS journey.
Excellent. All right. So coming back then, I think we covered that. So we're really coming up on time here. I know that the hour goes by so fast, but I really appreciate everyone that's joined us here today, both on from our standpoint, Ranjit from the SaaS Factory, of course, Andy and Ian for joining us here from DuploCloud, and everybody that's joining us as well live this morning here on Twitch too. So I think we probably will want to go ahead and start to wrap things up, but I do have a couple of other just quick questions here, and maybe this would be a good one for Ian to talk to. Are there any specific verticals that DuploCloud has customers in that you're kind of focused on, or is it pretty broad across the industry at this point?
Yeah, if you look at types of applications, it's very broad. If you look at architectures, they tend to be more of the modernized SaaS applications. Some of them don't start that way. And we start at that sort of modernization transformation stage. If you look at like the industry of like, what does this SaaS do? We tilt a little bit towards the more security and compliance. So if you think of B2B software, tends to have those security and compliance controls implemented earlier. That could be because they're in the health tech or fintech. It could be because they sell into businesses and enterprises. But it's fun being able to work with so many different types of SaaS organizations. And I would say it tends to be development team where they're either feeling some sort of bottleneck around the ops side of things, or they're just security and compliance is an area where they want to enhance their overall posture. So like I remember in Q4 of last year, we did 50 or 60 compliance workshops where we just talked about either the process to audit or the overall comfort level. We also have a lot of cost optimization type conversations. And AI/ML is obviously getting a ton of the VC funding right now. So we have a lot of AI/ML ops or AI/ML oriented applications. But fundamentally, under the hood, the architectures are like it's SaaS at the end of the day.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you again to everyone for joining us here today. Thank you to everybody in the audience. Please, if you would, make sure and jump out, take a look at our YouTube channel for Building SaaS on AWS. We have over 50 previous episodes covering all sorts of different topics related to SaaS. Of course, you can always learn more about SaaS on AWS by going to our SaaS on AWS landing page, which is linked here as well in the QR code. And to get to DuploCloud, you can always go to DuploCloud.com, which we have here. And I know Bill has put some additional links into the chat as well related to some of the things that we were working on here today. We highly recommend DuploCloud, especially if you're just getting started with SaaS. It can be a great way to accelerate your experience and get rid of some of that undifferentiated heavy lifting that comes with SaaS. So Ian, Andy, and Ranjit, thank you all so much for being with me here today. Everyone out there, have a great couple of weeks. We'll see you back in 2 weeks on Building SaaS on AWS with another show and new guests. So have a good one, everyone. And always remember, happy building.